Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Jerry Paul, and he's going to tell us about some spiritual experiences he had. Now, you wrote a book about these, didn't you? Dwell in Love, is that the name of your book?
Yes.
Okay. So feel free to start wherever you like and take as long as you like. And just tell us what you want to today.
All right. For many years, I had been studying some spiritual books and trying to come into a closer communion with God, and I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. And I was also studying the book of Isaiah, and in the 6th chapter, there's this story of Isaiah coming into the presence of God. And shortly after that, one night about 1 a.m., I had a dream. And as soon as it was over with, I knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a spiritual experience. And I was born in 1940. This was in the 1970s. And so I had been dreaming for some weeks, maybe a couple of months before that, that I was searching for the entrance to a secret stairway, but I never found it. Well, in this particular dream, someone came up to me and said, "Wait here, I'll go and get a key." And he came back, and I saw him unlock some golden gates. And then I ascended a very narrow staircase and came up onto what appeared to be a stage. And it was a very lofty and royal hall, adorned with gold and beautiful draperies. I really felt I was approaching the presence of God. And it seemed that suddenly the level of consciousness was dropping, and I was fighting to get it back, much as a person who's drowning is fighting to get to the top of water. And I did get back up. And then I noticed this old man who might have been an overseer like a St. Peter. And for some reason, I turned around, and then I saw this blinding light. It was so intense that I could not bear it. So I threw myself on my face, and I heard a voice deep within me say, or ask God to never let me stray from the way to Him, to make me pure, and to make me of service to my fellow humans. It seemed that this presence was on a balcony, like the balcony in a Gothic cathedral above the entrance. Then the splendor began to fade again, and I fought to regain it, but I was not able to, and I saw a beautiful curtain closing on a very high but narrow stage, and I saw the word Pluto written across it. And that was the end of the dream. And for many years, I pondered the meaning of the word Pluto. I knew that in Greek mythology, Pluto was the god of the underworld where souls go after death. So it was the world beyond. And so I was very happy to have had that experience and thought I would experience it very often, again and again. But it didn't prove to be true. And so that was in the 70s. And then in the spring of 82, I had been going through a lot of stress. I was studying data processing, which I didn't really like. And I had a lot of other problems with the family. And I was really stressed out. And this friend of mine called me and said, "I'm coming to see you during your spring break? And I said, oh, I don't have time right now. And he said, well, I'm coming anyway. And so I wasn't looking forward to that because I was under so much stress. But as we were talking one evening, I was telling him I seemed to be almost at the bottom of a bottomless pit, or at least as far down as I could go. And as I was talking, I noticed a light in him, in his chest, the breast. But I disregarded that. And as we continued to talk, I noticed it several times. But there was so much going on in my life, I didn't have time to think about it and try to sort it out. And one day he said, let's go to a movie. And I said, I don't have time. I've got income tax forms to fill out and all sorts of other stuff. He said, well, I'll drive. Well, he wanted to go see Chariots of Fire. I didn't know what that was. As it turned out, it was a movie with a very strong spiritual tone to it. And after the movie had been going for about half an hour, I suddenly noticed that Jesus was sitting next to me in the body of my friend. There was no doubt into my mind, but this was Jesus. I recognized that presence. And he was radiating to me a very strong divine love. And what's interesting is I had been drinking a lot of water and I had to get up to go to the restroom several times. And every time when I came back, he was still there. So it was an experience that really overwhelmed me. And I told my friend about it later, and he said, well, I knew something was going on. And so he talked to me and about some things that I could do to develop myself spiritually further than I had already gone, so that I began to do that. And then after that, there were a number of, as I began to practice seeing or seeking the presence of God in other people. And that's what my friend said he was doing with me when I saw the light in him. So I had some other experiences, and one of them that was really touching was my parents had an old country store, and I was there one day, and this old man who was usually in a good humor, but he was totally uneducated. He couldn't even write his name. But he came in, and that day he was just grumpy. And I was not the one who was helping him. I was just observing it. And so all of a sudden I said to God, I'd like to experience my oneness with this man. And instantly I felt it. And right after that, the man was finished with his shopping and he turned to leave. And as he walked past me, he turned around and said in his colloquial dialect, you know, pretty boy, sometimes I'm a little fussy, but I really like you. And I knew immediately that he had felt something too. And there were other experiences. I prayed for a man who was on death row, and I had this experience with him. And the next day, after he was executed, it was said on the news that he said he regretted what he had done, but he knew that he deserved that. And it seemed that he was released and ready to go. I also practiced seeing God's presence in a couple of world leaders who were on the negative side of humanity, I would say. At least I judged it at that time. And I'm one of them in particular. I was amazed that after, it was several months, maybe 5, of practicing at least once a day and trying to see that Spirit of God in his heart. Suddenly he opened the door of his heart, and I saw a brilliant and still light. And I realized after that every time I thought of this man, I only thought of the light. I didn't think of those things that had turned me off earlier. And my mother had been going through a lot of suffering with a knee replacement, hip replacement, and other things. And she was always a very active person. She liked to cook, and everything she cooked was from scratch, and it was wonderful. But now she was weak and depressed, and she would just lie on the couch all day long and do nothing. So I attempted to commune with her for a whole year before something happened. But then when she opened the door of her heart, it was like a lively and moving light that just washed over me and made me laugh. So the next day when I came home from work, there were freshly baked pastries on the kitchen table, and she was back at her old self. And I thought, well, really, that is amazing that sometimes when we pursue seeing only holiness in another person long enough, we will have a breakthrough, and we'll have that experience of communing. I even had an experience with a dog one day. This friend of mine had told me that he had a friend whose dog was in really bad shape, and she really loved the dog, and the vet had said, we're just going to have to euthanize the dog because there's just no hope for it. And so I prayed for the dog, and then for 3 days after that, every time I would think about her and pray for her, I would see her, and I could feel her rushing to me, and she would jump on me, as dogs do when they're happy to see you. And so a couple of days after that, my friend and I were sitting in a restaurant and waiting to be served, and suddenly I just had to laugh. I could tell the spirit of that dog was there on the floor just looking up at me. And I just had to tell my friend about it. So after I had come back home from my visit, I was talking to my friend. He said, oh, I talked to my friend who owns the dog. And she said, the dog is healed. And the veterinarian says, it's a miracle. Well, that really amazed me. And I had some other experiences. I don't know. Do you want to go into a couple more?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, that's my clock chiming. I was the instrumentalist at a church, and we had a pastor there who loved to talk about the love of God. And when he did so, we knew that he really knew what he was talking about. But one morning he came to church, and he was distressed about something. And so his sermon turned out to be what I would call a tongue lashing of a sermon. He was giving us a hard time, about how we should live our lives and how we should live them. And after a few minutes of that, I wanted to hear something else. So I just sat there and I looked at him. I focused on his chest area, and I just focused intensely on the light and the love of God being there. And after about 5 minutes, he stopped almost in mid-sentence, and he turned and looked straight at me. And then after that, the tone of his voice was very gentle, and the rest of his sermon was extremely inspiring. Well, all of these things really amazed me, but even more so, perhaps, this friend of mine who had been with me in the theater when I experienced the presence of Jesus there. He was having a problem with his stomach, and so the doctor was afraid it was an ulcer, maybe even a stomach cancer, and they wanted to put a light down through his throat and look in his stomach, and they told him that he couldn't eat anything for, I think it was 12 hours or 24. So the night before the procedure, he had told me that about the procedure that was upcoming, and so I sat down in a meditation, and I started focusing on the light of God in him. And he was not responding at all. It seemed as he closed his door and bolted it. And I knew that procedure was coming up the next day. And so finally I said, "You can ignore me if you like, but if you think I'm going away, you're wrong. I'm going to stay here until you open the door." Well, after about 5 minutes, he suddenly flung the door open and allowed God to bless me with a wave of divine love. And I gave thanks, knowing that my friend had released himself to God, and all was going according to God's will. So the next evening, I called to find out the results of the test, and I asked, "What did they find?" And he said, "Nothing, but I had a healing." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "I had been told that I couldn't have anything to eat for a certain number of hours and couldn't take any kind of medication. And last night I had a terrible sinus headache, and I wasn't getting any better, so I decided to just soak in a tub of hot water. And as I lay there in the water, I had a healing, and I knew you had something to do with it." So I have continued to practice doing this kind of prayer with people, and sometimes people don't respond at all. Sometimes they respond quickly, and there are a couple of people I've been praying for several years. I get some response, but it doesn't seem that they have released themselves to God, because the problems they're having in their lives continue. So I have to say that prayer and meditation can be hard work at times. But also, I had for a long time the feeling that when time came for me to come to earth, that I just didn't want to come, that I was just rebelling, and somebody was about to shove me down the shaft. And I said, no, I want to talk to Jesus. I want to come into the presence of Jesus. And so they allowed me to do that. And he asked me, "Do you care for your brothers and sisters as much as you care for yourself?" I said, "It bothers me a lot. They are suffering terribly, and I think something needs to be done about it." Well, he he threw me a curve. He said, "There is something that can be done. Would you care to help?" Well, who could say no to Jesus? I cringed, and I said, "It's going to be painful." And I had a long talk with Jesus, and he encouraged me, assured me over and over again that he was always be there and never fail me on a promise. And that is true. But there have been times when the stress in my life was so great that I just sort of lost sight of that, and was like a worm in an ant bed, as they say. So I'm still going through many things, and at the age of 82 with inflammatory arthritis, it's not easy. And I would love to go on to something else, but it appears that there must be a couple of things left that God wants me to do. So I'm trying to be positive and endure and still help people. I must say that the highest experiences of being close to God or in communion with God that I have are when I am praying for other people and seeking to find the presence of God in their hearts. And one last thing about the time before I came to earth, as I was about to leave, Jesus's words to me were, walk in the light. So I've tried to do that, and I hope that some people have benefited by the work that I try to do with them. So was there something else that you wanted?
Oh, just whatever you want to share is fine.
Well, I've said a lot.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you sharing all of this. It sounds like you've led a life, as God intended you to, or as you had chose to when you came here.
I've tried, but it really is not easy. I'm sure we get put through a lot of things because we need the experience, and the experience drives us back into the arms of God, whereas otherwise we might get distracted by things of earth. And even though things on earth seem so bad at times, what little difference we can make is important. And the important thing is being an empty vessel for God, trying to get out of the way and let God's love flow through us, because that's what people need to experience.
You can only imagine the changes you've seen in 82 years in this country, where things are now.
Well, it does bother me. And I had another experience that, well, this may shock some people, and some people may be turned off by it, but I'm going to tell you, I think I'm being reminded of it because I should. I went on a visit to some friends of mine, a spiritual group of people in Germany, about 8 years ago, I think it was. And some of them knew that I like to pray laying on of hands, and so they asked me to do it with them, and they came up to the apartment that I was staying in. And after they had all left, I was just sitting there and praying, continuing to pray for some of them. And suddenly, I started thinking about Adolf Hitler. And I wondered, I kept brushing that thought aside. I was wanting to pray for these people. And finally, I said to myself, why am I thinking about Hitler? Suddenly, I realized he was there, standing by my left side. Well, he didn't frighten me, but I was wary of him because I've heard stories of the beings of people who passed on coming back and they playing havoc with your life or whatever. And I said, what do you want? He said, love. Well, that really flabbergasted me. And so I was still a little wary, and I said, if you're really serious, I'll take you to Jesus. Well, I thought that being the spirit of someone who had created so much havoc on earth that he would just head for the door when I said the name of Jesus. But he didn't go anywhere. He just stood there patiently waiting for me to keep my word. So I took him to Jesus and left him there. Later, I just kept thinking, if someone who led the life on earth that Hitler led is now seeking for light, we owe everything that we can do for them. And it also shows there's no soul that's hopeless. So I just feel that even those who are creating havoc in the world today, in other countries, who are waging wars and who are killing people, we must pray for. Because Jesus said, I come not to save the righteous, but sinners.
That's right.
So sometimes it's not always easy when you start to pray for someone. Excuse me, you have to overcome the hurdle of your own biases and judgments and accept that God's spirit is in each one, and God's spirit is always holy. And that in the presence of everyone, we are on holy ground. All right, well, let's go on the clock again. I'll stop it until.
What's that? What'd you say about the clock?
I wanted to mute it until the clock was over, but it's over now.
Oh, okay. Oh, I never heard it. I never heard your clock, so.
Oh, it was
Okay.
chiming loudly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it made no sound at all through here. So you're ready to go, huh? You're just waiting.
Yes, when you reach a point where your body's causing aches and pains at night, and you have problems sleeping, and you can't get up and go places like you used to, you just begin to get weary of hanging around, and you know what's on the other side has got to be a much better experience. However, a beautiful friend of mine said to me recently, you need to experience God's kingdom here on earth and not wait until you're on the other side. So when the aches and pains are there, I just try to look through it and get through it and experience that.
That's beautiful. Well, I wish you all the luck. I hope you get feeling better. And thank you so much for coming on and
Thank you.
sharing your life stories with us.
Thank you for having the interview.
Uh-huh.
Bye-bye.